Hello, I'm Charles Kasumba, and welcome back to The Compass. In this episode, our members will be discussing how they are actively changing narratives in practice, from reframing priorities to sharing stories that challenge outdated assumptions. They share how their internal compasses guide their work as global changemakers. Let's dive in.
Hi, so I'm Mariana Rondon, Program Director of Plataforma CIPO. We are a Brazilian think tank founded and led by women dedicated to climate, sustainable development, and global governance reforms, looking from a perspective of the Global South, but also Latin America. What about you?
It's a great pleasure to be with you and to share some experience. I'm Gilles Yabi, based in Dakar, Senegal, originally from Benin, which is another West African country. And I'm the executive director and founder of WATHI, West Africa Citizen Think Tank. And the idea of WATHI is to be a platform that allows people from the region and actually also outside the region to think collectively about the major challenges that we face. And so we organize a lot of roundtables and discussions, and we also publish papers on everything which is important for the future of West Africa.
Oh, great. Amazing. So the first question we have is, what is common misconception about our regions? And so how do you see that if you have to pick one?
Yeah, maybe I can add also that, initially I was trained as a development economist, and then I worked as a political analyst for many years on conflicts in West Africa. And so it's a bit difficult to talk about the misconception and the narratives because, of course, from my own experience, I work on some difficult issues, which are part of these misconceptions about Africa in general: poverty, conflict, violence, bad governance are, I think, still quite dominant when people hear about the continent, generally not only West Africa. And so the reality is that, yes, of course, we do have conflict, we do have challenges, but of course, you cannot reduce the continent and you cannot reduce any country of the continent to these challenges. And also the diversity of the continent is something which is extremely key. And I think globally people don't know that it is, we are talking about 54 countries in Africa. If I take just West Africa, which is the region I work in, it is basically 15 countries. And each of these countries are extremely diverse in terms of cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity. And of course, a common thing with the continent is that we have the most youthful population in the world. And I think it means that we have challenges in terms of, bringing health, education, economic opportunities to the youth. But at the same time, it means a huge opportunity. And it means that the continent, African continent, is going to be a major player, even just because of the demography and the difference that we have between the demographic trends in Africa and what's happening in many other parts of the world.
Oh, I didn't know that information. Quite interesting. So, as you said, with Latin America, it's the same. We are quite different. We speak about Global South, Latin America, Africa, as if it was one thing, but we know that it isn't. However, when we look to misconception, I think there is one thing that is common to all of us, that is the way they perceive us. And I mean the Global North in general, the way Latin America, Africa, Asia, the Global South countries are perceived as much more as a recipient of solutions than producers. And we know that first, it is not true. It's not what is happening in the world. So when we look for the climate agenda, we have seen so much advance because of the leadership of the Global South countries, looking for the adaptation topic that came into the table, just transition, climate finance, and so much more, the Bridgetown Initiative. So we have so much good practice and solutions. And most frequently, this is not perceived this way. And this is extremely dangerous because it changes everything. When we talk about the way the Global South is perceived. It changed who sits at the table. It changed how finance is allocated. It changed how priorities are settled. And in the end of the day, we are not represented as much as we should when we look to the Global South. We are 80% of the population, and we are not well represented in the mainly multilateral institutions. And this means that several billion people, I would say, are being affected because of this, because the priorities are not being taken into consideration, the main needs that we have and the solutions that we also can bring to the table.
No, great. I think definitely it's kind of the same perception that we have in the continent of not being represented enough in the global decision-making places. And of course, if we look at the UN, we look at the Security Council, we look at the international finance institution based in Washington, IMF, World Bank, it is very clear that now all those institutions have to change the way of working, but also the representation of the South should be significantly increased so that collective decisions about the future of humanity are taken, in a more respectful way by all the members of the global community, especially, of course, when we take climate change and other issues where we need to work collectively. We need to understand that these are common challenges and that the stakes are extremely high for the future and for basically the future generations. And I think that especially what is happening now in terms of a lot of attacks on multilateralism, I think it's the right period where Southern countries have to increase their relationship, their contact, their discussion, so that we work on shaping the new multilateralism that have to come.
Yeah, one thing is that it's not only unfair, but it's also not working. When we look to the numbers, when we look to the evidence, what shows is that the way the priorities are being set in the multilateral system is not working. Looking for the SDGs, for example, last year, the UN launched the SDG implementation report. We know that that's the Secretary General words, we are severely off track. The expectation is to achieve only 17%. And we are talking about hunger, we are talking about poverty, we are talking about food insecurity, billions of people living in these conditions. And this has much to do with the fact that we are underrepresented. And going back to the first question, that it's misconception. In the end of the day, it's all linked. How we are seen and how we are perceived and the space that we are occupying and where we should be.
Yeah, and I think also that the connection between what we have to do internally, what we have to do in our individual countries to strengthen our institutions, strengthen our economies, strengthen our states, improving our public policies, addressing the needs of the population. I think all of this has to be done, and it will also significantly help us to play a more important role globally. So I think we should not, separate what is the work that we have to do, internally, and the work that we have to do at the global level. I think both are connected, and probably the best way to be considered more justly by the rest of the world is also to increase again our internal capacities, especially continue to put education first. And I'm very happy that I'm speaking with someone who is also a women leader. And I think even on this issue of women leadership for think tanks, but even in the economy, in Africa, for example, all the reports show that you have basically the economy is really dominated by women, even if it is informal, what's to call informal economy, but informal economy is actually by far the dominant economy on the continent. But women are playing a major role. And if you take some few countries, you will see also women play a major role in politics and having actually better representation than in many countries, Western countries, for example, when you look at the women who are members of parliament, for example. So on all these issues, I think, again, it is important that we continue to do our task internally, and at the same time that we anticipate the geopolitical shift that are happening, and we try to not only to influence the narrative about us, but also to influence the reality in our countries.
Yeah, in the end of the day, when we talk about narratives, that's what we are talking about. We are talking influence, we are talking about power. And this is, again, comes back to the same question, this where we are and how well underrepresented we are. Because when we have the narratives, and this is so important, that one of the work that we are developing is the 1 for 8 billion campaign, together with Southern Voice, to be more transparent and also inclusive the next election of the Secretary General of the UN, but also to raise this gender issue as well. Why not a Madam Secretary General? Because it cascades through the whole system, and it shapes all the work that it's being done within the organization and globally as well. Yeah, so we've been trying to push these narratives in different forums as well, from the Global South perspective, not only internationally, looking for all the global governance reforms, but also, for example, regionally. We work in the Amazon, so we have this Amazon Treaty, where we have the 8 countries that signed what we call the Belém Declaration, with 113 commitments for the region. And this is exactly what we are pushing. We already know what needs to be done. The countries in the region, in the Amazon, we know the solutions. It's already there. It's there, a commitment done. So let's push for this agenda instead of having different countries and external perspectives from how we should, for example, protect the Amazon and the forest as a whole, all over the world, and the development of the region. Also bringing these different narratives when we look for the climate agenda with parliamentarians, with subnational governments, for them to understand where they are, because usually in the climate agenda, also in the development one, but the climate one, we speak a lot about national governments. Of course, it's a key player, no doubt about it, but we also have other stakeholders that are key, and sometimes they are not even aware of the role that they play. So we use a lot of the narrative storytelling to explain, first of all, where are you in this scenario and why it is important. So we have this diplomacy, parliamentarian diplomacy, to look, Brazil, we have several international commitments, but we need to translate these to national policy. And how do we do that? We do that using narratives, using strategic communication to influence the main stakeholders that we need to advance the agendas that we believe that are important.
I think I would be also interested in kind of a citizen engagement or issue about civic participation in Brazil, in the work that you do. We think about the policymakers, but what about kind of ordinary citizens? Are they active in Brazil in kind of trying to influence policies, not only on climate, but really on poverty, on all the issues that the country faces, including criminality? To what extent citizens are also part of the conversation here in Brazil?
We have a very strong civil society movement. They are quite strong in Brazil. And I think it's increasing more and more, the participation. We also have some social participation methodology and process quite well established in the country. This is important to say. Looking, for example, for our national climate plans, we have general consultations with civil society, think tanks, and so on. But there is still a big challenge when we look again. One thing is consultation, and I think it reflects not only at national level, but what we face as well in the international level. One thing is for us to push for advocacy work, to influence, for research, to make recommendations and so on, and the other thing is to be seated in the table and have the power to share, to shape the agenda. So this is a big difference that we have to say. And coming back to the global South again and the subnational governments, we are bringing now for COP30. We are calling a bank of solutions on climate agenda for subnational Brazilian governments, precisely to say, look, we have so much good best practice in Brazil, and this is so important. And I'll go now to the Southern Voice platform, because I think it links how important it is, this network, and to give visibility of the solutions that we have. And this is so important because we are living an overlapping, a polycrisis, whatever we want to say. We know that multiple crises, and we have no time. So when we talk about South-South cooperation and also to look to the Global South solutions that are already there, it's extremely important for us to learn the lessons, not only the good practice, but also the lesson learned from other countries and other subnational governments as well, because it saves us time, and we no longer have time to keep committing, to keep making the same mistakes. We no longer have this time. We gotta make others, but not the same ones.
No, I think Southern Voice is really precious. I think the very existence of a network is something that we should praise, because I think it's just create the possibility for connection that would not have happened, if there were not this network. And it's not just changing narratives. It is again being a space for connection so that people can know each other, can understand more about the different contexts. There are so many things in common between African countries and Brazil and Latin American countries, for example. Same with some Asian countries. So difference, but also similarities. Different stage depending on the issue that we talk about. So I think Southern Voice is already playing an important role in making this connection and this dialogue possible. And then in terms of the narratives as well, of course, when we get together on some common issues like climate change, but not only, like development, energy, education, for example, culture. I think it's again create the possibility for us, to have a better place in global discussion about the future of humanity. I think the very existence of Southern Voice also means something in terms of the values, in terms of people who really understand that we are all the same. It seems very, very obvious, but actually from what we can see in many parts of the world, it's not that obvious. We still have people who seems to think that we are not all the same and that we are not all responsible for building a better future for humanity. And I think now it is very clear that, again, Latin America, Africa, Asia, we are very aware of what happened in the past. It is important that now we are focused on how to build a better future for ourselves, but also for humanity and for the planet.
Yes, I believe Southern Voice, it's a very powerful platform. One, because as I said, we have no time anymore. So we have this overlapping of crises, multiple crises, when we look to inequality, when we look to the economic situation, geopolitical, and goes on and on, the climate emergency. So the solutions are already there. And the other thing is that all the reforms, the necessary reforms that we know that needs to happen internationally, are only going to happen, I truly believe that, if we keep pushing the Global South. And this platform is precisely for that, to give us not only the voice. We spent 2 days now in the Southern Voice Conference, and someone said that yesterday. It's not only about recognizing ourselves as Global South countries, but it's also to come together to have a common understanding of where we want to go, what is the future that we want to shape, and help shaping it to make it a reality.
That's it for this episode. Join us next week where our members will be discussing their involvement in the T20 process. See you then.
So one of the things that I think this process from T20 to Sulfur Voice to BRICS and others bring is that we start to understand a little bit more what are the mind gaps, what are the knowledge gaps that we have, what are the cultural difference, respecting this difference, but establishing effective dialogue.